And Julie actually reminded me that the carriers are not government entities. And so then, I think two of those bullets, the first and third bullet in the draft minutes, you can just delete.
Okay.
And then the second one, Marjorie just had some additional suggestion. And so then that's what I put in the email. Do you want me to try to copy and paste it into this chat? Or
Sure. Is it, are you able to send emails to other people? Is this unique to OEB and Pebb, or is this?
Yeah, you're right. This morning I've been able to send emails to everybody else, but it's not going through for you guys. I don't know why.
Is it a PDF?
No, I just responded to Rebecca's email that was sent to all of us.
Try sending, if you don't mind, try sending me just a blank test email.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say during our minutes review during this meeting, just bring up that correction, and then we can figure out how to get the information to myself and Rebecca somehow.
Okay, and it's like an exact quote from Marjorie, the subject matter expert. So, and she's got experience with the COVID thing that just happened. So I definitely didn't say, all those things in the meeting, but she thought it would be helpful for this group to have that guidance.
Okay, perfect.
So, yeah. Okay, let me see. Let me do a test email to you. So let's just do and test and send. Yeah, it just has still sending. It's got a circle going round and round and round. And then the other ones, it was like, we couldn't send your, I get a message like, we couldn't send your email.
And it's only to me, huh?
You and Rebecca. I tried to send to both you and Rebecca like 3 times.
That is strange.
It is, because like you said, I've been sending emails all day. And
I've received emails today from both, let's see, internal and I think external.
Yeah. Yeah, because I would be considered external since I'm using my SEIU device. So,
Yeah, I've received emails. Let me go to Friday or Thursday. So it's today. Yeah. I've received both internal and external emails. So, and I have not yet received that test email. So,
yeah, see, my computer, I'm sorry, it's been not working properly.
It may be on us. I have no idea.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of factors. So
we will just give it a few more minutes. I'm guessing we'll get started around 5 after. We need to wait for a few more committee members to join.
That's the OHA wellness policy anyway now, is to start 5 minutes after the hour to give people a chance to break in between meetings.
I hurried up and finished my noon yoga class so I could get to this one. So yeah, that extra 5 minutes can help with the transitions. I changed my clothes real quick and got back in front of the camera.
Oh, nice. Yep, I still have this still sending going.
I would maybe reach out to your IT folks at SEIU and see if there's any way they can identify whether it's an us issue or a you issue, because I have no idea.
Oh, I have a feeling it's a me issue, because my keyboard isn't quite working the way it's supposed to. And every once in a while now, I click on emails and I can't even see them. I try to click on it and open it. So Sharna, yes, I saw you sent an email. I tried to click on it and open it and I can't see it. So I definitely need to talk to IT about those issues.
Yeah, that's too bad. I'm sorry that it's not working right, but I just thought that might be a good test to see if it's going both ways.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let me try to click on it again. Okay. Let's see. Sure.
Hey, Steve.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Trish. Okay, quick unofficial roll call for Pmac members. I have Emily, Steve, just Emily and Steve. Has anyone else joined from the committee? Okay, we'll give it a couple more minutes.
I'm reading my 3-2-1 email I get every Thursday from an author, James Clear, and he has 3 ideas, 2 quotes, and 1 question to consider this week. So one thing he says is, a gift you can give yourself right now. Stop what you're doing, close your eyes. For the next 60 seconds, just breathe.
That's nice.
That's very nice. Sometimes I forget and I only breathe to about down to here. And I don't breathe all the way through. So thank you for the reminder.
Yeah. I think too, it's just so important to be present instead of, I don't know, thinking about the next thing or the next thing. That's helpful.
Okay, so one last roll call. Do we have any PMAC members besides Emily and Steve on the meeting? Okay, so I don't know what's going on today. Maybe it's just one of those days where a lot of folks had some conflicts. So we'll start the meeting. However, with only 2 members, I'm not so sure, unless more people join, we're going to be able to take any action. So I will get started. We'll see how many additional folks join and then go from there. So first off, welcome to our May Pmac member or Pmac meeting. We provided a link to the meeting stream through Microsoft Teams as usual, as well as a call-in option. So please use only one of the choices for audio. And please consider muting your end when you're not directly speaking up or participating. We have started the meeting recording. We do record these meetings. So that is something that I need to let folks know about. For today's agenda, we were going to review and approve the April meeting minutes, but unless a couple more members join, I think we may have to skip that and move that to next month. We'll then share some information about this week's board meeting. I'll then turn it over to Teresa and Stephen Neldner to present the Hero Scorecard results. And then last, I was going to facilitate a conversation that involves numerous EAP-related recommendations and actions for you to consider and to potentially move forward not only to the board, but also to move some potential recommendations to your partner committee, the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council. Let me stop there. Again, do we have any other PMAC members besides Steve or Emily? I see Veronica has joined.
Yes.
Hi, Veronica.
Hi, everybody.
So do we have any other PMAC members? I think with 3, we probably will still skip the minutes. So it's all right. I can adjust on the fly. So we will move the meeting minutes to next month. And we will, assuming we have a full cast of folks, we will review and approve both the April and this month's meeting minutes. So in terms of the agenda, next we have board updates and action items. So let me go ahead and share the high-level board updates. All righty. I believe you can see the slide up there. So the board covered a number of topics on Tuesday. We're not going to share many details. Folks can find the meeting materials and streams on our website, or you can always ask Rebecca or myself if you want to request some materials or have some questions about the topics. Among the topics, the board heard a presentation on the Heroes Scorecard report and results, which Teresa and Stephen will present to you today. Teresa presented an update on the agency wellness FTE work, which originated from a Pmac recommendation, if I remember correctly. Teresa, anything specific, any high-level updates on that you'd like to share?
I didn't think about it until just now, but it wouldn't hurt for me to send the document that I shared with the board to Pmac, so you don't have to dig for it in the board packet that's on Pebb's website. It was simply a description of all of the steps that Pebb staff, myself, have taken over the last year and a half since the board approved Pmac's recommendation that large agencies have FTE. And there was also a copy of the document that went to the HR managers at the 16 large agencies describing the benefits of having a committed wellness manager position within the agency, and some of the things that the Department of Corrections has been able to do because they do have dedicated FTE to a wellness manager. So I'll make a note to get that to everybody after the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. Any other questions? And maybe Teresa, if you could maybe assist me if anyone's raising their hands, because I have my presentation screens up. Canopy also presented its annual report, and it covered a lot of the same information that you've already been privy to that Canopy has presented to you all. And they also presented some information that will pave the way for our additional discussion later on today about some potential EAP-related recommendations. And then the board approved the final plan renewal rates. The board typically approves the final rates and financials after they've approved the final benefits and programs for the following year, which they did last month. So with that said, those were the updates. Are there any questions on the board updates? Not seeing any. I see the chat and there's no specific questions there. Okay, so with that said, we're going to turn it over to Teresa and Stephen, who's going to present the Hero Scorecard. Teresa, Stephen, you know the drill. You guys can take over and share the presentation. And let me check one last time for committee members. I have Veronica, Steve, and Emily. Do we have any other committee members who have been able to join? I'm not picking any up on the list. Okay, so assuming no one else joins, what we'll do, we'll continue to have the same presentations and discussions we're planning to have. And I am just going to pencil out some updates while Stephen and Teresa present. Rather than asking for any formal action, I think what we'll do is probably just take a guess at what the committee would probably feel like doing, and then we'll firm up decisions probably at next month's meeting when we have a full cast of characters. But for now, let me turn it over to Teresa, Stephen. And again, I encourage everyone in the audience, all this work we're really taking a group approach on, and probably for the first real time in ever as far as I've been, at Pebb. And so there are going to be pieces that we're going to ask Pmac to pick up. There are going to be some pieces we ask the coordinating council to pick up. And just know this is kind of new to all of us, and part of our discussion later on will be trying to figure out how to assign out appropriate recommendations to each group. So even though we're short a few Pmac members, I don't think that's going to stop us from getting our work done today or going forward. So with that, Stephen and Teresa, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Hello, everybody. I am Pebb OEB Wellness Manager. I think I've met most of you, but I also wanted to recognize there are several members of the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council on the call today. So you're getting a taste of what we will present to you with respect to the Hero Scorecard next month at the council meeting. So Stephen Neldner and I are going to split up the slides. I'll get us started. Do I need to share my screen, Brian, or have you got that pulled up?
I do not have it pulled up. I was hoping you guys could share and present it, but I can. I can pull up the email. 1 second.
I pulled up the attachment, but it's got all my notes on here, so I didn't think that was necessary to have all my notes and speaking points along with the slides, just the slides.
Okay, and is that
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so before I get started, I just want to let you know that HERO is an acronym. It means Health Education Research Organization. Mercer collaborates with HERO on the development of the scorecard and the maintenance of the database. And last fall in 2021, we administered the HERO scorecard with a group of stakeholders, some of whom are on this call today. The HERO Health and Wellbeing Best Practices Scorecard is designed to help organizations learn about best practices for promoting workplace health and well-being and to discover opportunities to improve and measure progress over time. HERO defines health and well-being initiatives as a set of organized activities and systematic interventions sponsored by employers and governmental or community agencies with the goal of educating employees and their dependents about their health, increasing their awareness of modifiable health risks, and promoting and supporting positive changes in their health behavior. The scorecard was developed in consultation with leading authorities on population health and well-being, and this tool provides us, Pebb, with an assessment of how our programs stack up to others in the National Scorecard database. Pebb has completed several scorecards over the years, most recently in 2019. And a new updated version of the scorecard was introduced in 2021. That scorecard changed significantly, and because of that, we can't make direct comparisons between our results from 2019 to 2021.
And Teresa, are you still intending to be on the title page, slide
yes,
1? Okay,
yes, yes. At the end of the presentation, I'll share some observations about a few similarities that we found between 2019 and 2021, but those aren't direct comparisons. The scorecard was completed using guidance from HERO, which recognized that many employers may have closed their offices due to COVID. That was true for state offices. Last fall, our offices were closed to the public anyway. Most employees were working working remotely or a hybrid, but very few employees were actually working in the office. We responded to the questions based on when those closures would end because we knew the buildings would eventually open. And we also based our responses on the plan year of 2021 last year. So real quickly, before I turn it over to Dr. Neldner, I'll explain the process that we use to complete the scorecard. HERO recommends that you get input from a lot of individuals in order to complete it accurately. And so the people who participated in Pebb's scorecard process included members of the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council, the Pebb board, Pebb leadership, and a large state agency. We convened everybody over Teams, and our partner from Kaiser introduced the scorecard, asked the questions, clarified the questions when needed, and then the group agreed, discussed and agreed on the responses to each question. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Neldner now, and you can proceed to the next slide.
Thank you, Teresa, and hello, members of both committees and the committee and the council, I should say. Glad to be with you today. And for those of you whom I haven't met yet, I am Stephen Neldner from Mercer. Mercer is a consultant to Pebb and OEB and have been working with both Pmac and Coordinating Council for several years now. So delighted to be here. The other thing I'd like to tell you is I'm actually responsible for Mercer's relationship with HERO around the HERO Scorecard. I've been involved in that relationship for over 12 years. And I'm also a co-author of the HERO Scorecard. So have intimate knowledge of it, and I can take any feedback that you want to provide as well for future iterations of that. So what we'd like to do as a preliminary to actually looking at your scores and the recommendations and your strengths already in place is to just take a look at where you land compared to other organizations at a high level and share those benchmarks. And then we'll go into strengths and opportunities that Teresa will share in just a moment. Next slide, please. So as Teresa's already mentioned, this is version 5 of the HERO Scorecard, and she also mentioned that there are some differences between the previous version. She'll talk more about that later. But one of the things I do want to say that we've enhanced in version 5 relative to version 4 is a more acute focus on mental health, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social determinants of health, as well as employees' perceptions of their organization's support of their health and well-being. So those are areas that of particular focus, and we've added some additional questions around those. And the next slide, please. This is a high-level review or a quick review of some of the research that we've done on the HERO Scorecard database over the course of years that we've had it in play. And the headline here is that more well-being best practices drive better outcomes. And those outcomes are typically improved health, lower medical costs. And if you're a company that's publicly traded, we actually did a study on publicly traded companies that looked at their scores on the HERO Scorecard. We took the high scores, those that scored above the 75th percentile, and compared those, their stock market performance over 6 years to the Standard & Poor's 500 index. And you can see that those organizations that scored high and had more best practices for health and well-being in place actually outperformed the Standard & Poor's 500 by 76% over that period of time. So we can't call this a cause and effect relationship. We can't say for sure that because they had a focus on health and well-being that's why they had better stock performance. But clearly there's an association. This study has been replicated on Coop Award winners, which is the most prestigious award for health and well-being for the American College of Occupational and Environmental Medicine has a scorecard, if you will, or a group of individuals that they award recognition to based upon their strong well-being and safety programs. That group also outperformed the S&P 500. So at least we can say there's an association. And it seems that employers who value and support the health and well-being of their workforce really do better as a business and as an organization.
And Stephen, I believe when you presented evidence leading to the long-term HEM recommendation during that discussion, you presented something very, very similar supporting evidence with respect to wellness programs. And if I remember correctly, basically said the more actions or the more diverse actions you take, the better the outcomes. And this sounds like this goes even a step further and talks about that even the organizations as a whole do better.
Yes.
So
yes,
this is another layer on top of the evidence you already presented.
Correct. Good observation, Brian. Yeah, and that's really what we're trying to do is even though we don't have a randomized control study, which is the gold standard in medical research, because it's just not practical in a worksite setting, right? To have some be the control group and others be the intervention group, and how do you put a firewall between those who get the treatment and those that don't? I know I'm talking research jargon right now, but the point is that the best we can do is find associations.
Hi, Matthew. How are you?
Did someone have a question?
Oh, don't know. This meeting, I'm on the Pmac board, and I
We
have to
have
be at this meeting, and I have
general.
another
We
board
can
meeting right
mute
after,
him if
and
I can find
it's
him.
like,
Let's
I just don't see, it's not
see.
over until
Where is
6.
he?
I just don't.
Okay, we
But I
will.
haven't said any.
There we go.
We didn't mean to be listening in on that phone call. Okay.
Okay. Oh wait, did you go on mute, Stephen? I think
It
you
looks
went
like
on mute.
I'm
You
back.
muted yourself. We don't want to mute you, Stephen.
All right. I'm back, yes. So yes, the bottom line here is that while the best we can do is to find associations and evidence, corroborating evidence that well-being works, if you will, and the more best practices that an organization employs, the better likelihood that you'll have positive results. The left-hand side actually shows lower healthcare costs over 3 years for those organizations that had high scores compared to lower scores. So we can move forward, please. So you already heard a little bit of the history here. We started in 2006 with a subject matter expert developed scorecard. In 2009, Mercer became involved, and we revised the scorecard in collaboration with Mercer, in collaboration with Hero, and put the scorecard online and was able to be made available to any organization throughout the country and, quite frankly, throughout the world now, because we have an international version as well to take and learn what their best practices are relative to others. Then we've revised versions over the course of time in both 2014 and 2021 based upon research that we've done, like we just discussed, as well as other best practices that have come to light. And it's lasted the test of time. Over 2,500 organizations have completed the scorecard since its inception, and we're excited to know that we can continue to evolve it. And Teresa's going to talk a little bit later about some of the other iterations and enhancements that we're making even as we speak right now. So on to the next slide, please. So the point here is there are 6 sections of the scorecard. You're going to see in a moment what your scores were, what Pebb scores were relative to a benchmark of other organizations and the national standards. And you can see the different topics that are covered. What I'd like to point out here on this version of the Hero Scorecard, version 5, compared to version 4, which you completed previously, is that we've shifted some of the points for the sections. And this was based upon the research that we did. And I'm going to share a little bit of that research in just a moment. But we've shifted points away from programs in section 3 to more in organizational and cultural support and in strategic planning, section 1. And the reason is we found, and you'll see in a moment, that organizational and cultural support is the overall best practice, the most associated with all the positive outcomes. So we improved the weighting of that section in the overall scorecard. We don't think 200 points is the ideal for any organization, and we'll talk about that just in a moment, but that is the total points that are available. Next slide, please.
And Stephen, I was just going to comment that I find that interesting because that's kind of where both Pmac and the council's focus has been too on, part of what we're doing with the framework and tying our work together is that strategic support, but also the focus has been on the organizational and cultural support. So I'm kind of pleased to see, all of those bodies of work kind of moving somewhat harmoniously forward.
Yeah, absolutely true, Brian. You're right. While we know that we're relying upon carriers to provide some of those services for members in their particular health plans, this first effort in the framework is our discovery of what's available. And now how can we better promote and communicate to members what's available to them? So that's certainly an element of organization and cultural support. And this slide shows the 4 best practices. I call this the slide of the very best of the best practices. And as I said, the organizational leadership support is number 1, most associated with improved health, lower medical costs, participation, at least in biometric screenings and health assessment, and also employees' perception that their organization cares about their health and well-being. The incentives were narrowly focused on participation in health assessment and biometric screening, so I don't want to over promote that. because we don't have data to support that, but clearly incentives get people to take some action. And comprehensive programs. This is, do you cover the full continuum of care and support that your population needs? And then program integration means, are we getting people to the right services at the right time? So an example I like to use is, well, I know Teresa's going to talk more about it. I'm not going to go too deeply there. But program integration just simply means, at a high level, we're identifying people's needs, and we're getting them to the right partner or service provider when they need the help. And they do that relatively seamlessly. Next slide, please. And this is a slide that really drills down one layer further on leadership and organizational support. And these are the 10 different best practices within that domain. And the percentages are the relative contribution that these individual best practices contribute to the overall best practice and overall outcomes approach. So you can see that the variety, we won't spend time on it, that you can see it within your deck, and the writing is pretty small for most of you to read anyway right now. But the point is that we have best practices, we know that they're there, and we will use those best practices as we develop the well-being strategy for Pebb and the state of Oregon going forward.
Stephen, this is Brian again, a question that I don't expect you to be able to answer off the top of your head, maybe a takeaway, but in that work, are there any specific lessons learned on what works better for larger organizations, kind of like the state of Oregon, where we're so spread out? And even though it's one employer, it's like there's all these formal units underneath the employer. And just any lessons learned that we would want to visit at a later time that would be, more appropriate just for based on how the state is set up?
Yeah, that's a good question. We did not do a factor analysis. We didn't slice and dice by different kinds of organizations or different population sizes or regions for that matter. So the closest we can come to answering that question is we do have benchmarking information about which best practices are being used by large organizations, government organizations, organizations within the Pacific Northwest, organizations over X number of lives. So we could have some data that would help us see what practices are in place, but we didn't do a factor analysis that would associate those practices with outcomes. If that's still of interest, we can certainly do that.
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to add to what Stephen just said is that the HERO Scorecard can be completed by individual agencies too. In fact, it was listed as one of the assessment tools that agencies could use when they were doing an assessment in their 2-year agency wellness plans. To my knowledge, no agency has done the HERO Scorecard, but it's certainly something that they can continue to get more specific information about within their own agency as the employer versus the state of Oregon as a whole.
Yep, that's a great idea. We do have organizations that have different operating companies or divisions, and they've done just that and compared them. But even if you don't want to compare to other segments of your organization, as Teresa just said, being able to have a baseline and then an opportunity to compare your progress over the course of time is a great way to use the HERO Scorecard. All right, next slide, please. So just a note, as I mentioned earlier, 200 points is the total amount of points that are possible, but we don't really expect any organization. I don't know that any organization has ever reached 200 points because we wouldn't expect them to. And that really depends upon your culture, your values, the size of the organization, the distribution of employees, the number of work sites, so many different things. So for the state of Oregon, for example, what might not be a best practice that would be applicable? Well, in your case, retirees might not be an appropriate group to communicate with or to include in this. Having an on-site clinic at all of your work sites, probably not feasible. Making environmental changes like getting LEED certification for your buildings. Desirable, but probably not something the state's going to retrofit every building in the foreseeable future, or even build new buildings to that in the foreseeable future. So there are things that just don't make sense for every organization, and that's why 200 points is probably not achievable. And again, we've already made the point that higher scores are associated with more best practices, which are associated with best outcomes. All right, next slide, please. Let's take a look at your scores at Pebb compared to benchmarks on the next slide. This is a high-level view, and this looks at the 113 points that Pebb scored on this version 5. That puts you in the top half of all organizations relative to having more best practices in place. And just for the sake of reference, we put in the threshold for the 75th percentile, which we consider the breakpoint for high scores. That's 127 points. So not right there yet. Show us some opportunity for improvement. We know that. That's why we're working on strategy and all the things that we've got planned. So let's take a look at how your 113 points breaks down into 6 different sections. So first of all, you can see that we've got Pebb scores in the first column next to the section names. And then we used a greater than 5,000 employee benchmark to compare your organization scores. And then the maximum points for each section, of course, is in that far right column. You can see at the time that we cut off this database slice, there were 118 employers in the new database. We have considerably more now, but the benchmarks have not moved very much since then. And that's typically what we see, is that once you get to 100 or so, it becomes pretty stable in terms of what is the benchmark.
And for Pmac members, and even members of the council that are attending today, think about what this information and results mean to, the work we've done so far and the priorities we've identified. Especially, given that, on this slide, the organizational cultural support and program integration are the 2 areas, where we score the lowest. What are some other things we may want to explore, in the second half of this year, after we get through some potential EAP related recommendations. So just some food for thought.
Yeah. Good observations. Yep. And those are the areas that have the biggest bang for your buck based upon the research that we did. And that's where the points, even though the integration points aren't all that high relative to the total score, we know that was one of the best practices that was highly associated with good outcomes. So good observations, Brian. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over now to Teresa to take us through your more granular results. Teresa, I think you are still muted.
That helps. Okay, thank you. I've kind of got 2 different screens open here. So Brian, I won't be able to watch if any hands go up, but maybe the rest of you can see if there's any questions as we move along. So what I'm going to do now is go over how Pebb did on the scorecard. So let's see, we're on slide 14 now, the approach to opportunity analysis. How Mercer analyzed our results was to look at the practices that Pebb was not currently implementing, or practices that we were only partially implementing. Mercer also looked at practices that government and public sector companies have implemented, so that it would be more, like compared to like. There are some things that are done in the private sector that aren't practical or even allowed in the public sector. And the third thing was that Mercer identified practices that have a higher point value. So meaning there may be more things we could do, but they have fewer points assigned to them. So to get more bang for our buck, Mercer identified practices that give us more point value. Even though there are fewer of them, they're going to give us more results by engaging in them. Okay, so next slide, please. These are the key recommendations. I'm going to repeat these at the end of the presentation, but kind of be thinking about these as we go into each section here. The key recommendations that came out were that Pebb should continue using the scorecard to identify areas where we can improve. So repeating it every few years. Focus on those 2 sections, the strategic planning and the organizational and cultural support. That's where the most points are too, if you recall. The third was to develop a written multi-year strategy and tactical roadmap to execute our strategy. Those terms should sound familiar to Pmac and council members because that is exactly what we've been working on with the well-being strategy. And then finally, to make sure that all of our stakeholders are able to review it and provide input and get feedback and contribute towards the development of the strategy and the roadmap. So next slide, please. All right, so this first slide is on the strategic planning section. And at the bottom, I just want to call your attention to that blue bar that has the 31, 34, and 50 on it. That refers back to the table that Dr. Neldner covered, where the first column on the left, the 31, that's how Pebb scored in that section of strategic planning. The 34 is how other large public employers with 5,000 or more employees did on that section. And then the 50 is the total amount of points possible for that section. So the things on the green are the strengths, the things that we're doing well and that we should continue doing, which is to utilize the scorecard and keep looking at our medical and pharmacy data and disability data. The opportunities are in the orange box, where Pebb could create a formal strategic plan for our health and well-being program, and exactly that's what we're doing here, along with that tactical roadmap. Connecting our agency level organization goals to both long and short term. And what this refers to is, find my notes here. Where'd they go here? This is referring to the agency wellness plans. So ideally, that overarching well-being strategic plan is kind of the framework, and the agencies could use that framework to align their individual wellness plans with. And then the third bullet was the really important point to continue engaging our union leadership to learn priorities and well-being and what our represented members want and what they will support. Next slide, please. This is the organizational and cultural support. And again, you can see where Pebb scored 27 compared to 32 of similar employers out of a possible 60-point total in that section. The strengths that Pebb should continue engaging in are wellness champions or wellness coordinators. All of the state agencies have at least one wellness coordinator, and they all have wellness committees operating at various levels of operations. That we should continue to do that. Those are important pieces of getting members connected to and understanding and using their benefits. Those agency wellness plans and the council and Pmac, we will continue with that wellness infrastructure. The opportunities in this section are to continue working on how we might help agencies dedicate FTE to a wellness manager position. We want to increase leadership engagement with programs. That was one of the things that was identified as a key strategy that has outcomes per the research. And there are many, many ways to help agency leaders be engaged. There is guidance in the agency wellness plans, in the guidance document for agency wellness plans that outlines several actions that managers and leaders can take to show support for wellness. And agencies were asked to include some of those strategies in their 2-year wellness plans. And the third bullet there in the orange box is to review policies and procedures to include support of mental health and well-being. And as you know, since the scorecard was completed last fall, Pmac and the council have engaged with the carriers and specifically Canopy, our employee assistance program, and our employee resource groups to better understand the issues that members are seeking care for and how we might better support and expand opportunities and ability to get EAP services to folks and to agencies. Okay, next slide, please. So the next section was on programs. Pebb has always been very generous, and the state has been very generous with our benefits. So our strength is that we have a real robust array of services, and that we should continue offering those in a variety of delivery formats and giving employee choices. On the right-hand side are the opportunities to take a look at well-being in a broader way and to include career and personal growth opportunities. That's that holistic approach to wellness that includes other elements besides what we normally think of with physical health, mental health, nutritional health, that kind of thing. Social and financial are important pieces of well-being too. And we can do that by inventorying what we have and finding out where the gaps are. And that, again, speaks to some of the work that the Council and Pmac are doing with the carriers and the EAP. Where are the gaps and where can we help fill those in? Next slide, please. Program integration. Get my notes here. I think I'm on the wrong slide here. So integrating our programs are going to strengthen their effectiveness and better assure that we're addressing member needs. And that's part of the work that Pebb and our stakeholder groups are doing. The right-hand side are the opportunities. Some of you will recognize what this first bullet refers to, a consolidated wellness portal. This speaks to the work that Pmac has been engaged in for the past few years, and their recommendation that Pebb use one consolidated wellness platform that includes all of our well-being offerings. And the plan to implement that is going to be putting that into Pebb's request for proposal schedule priorities over the next 3 to 5 years. The second bullet, opportunity to integrate safety and disability data in existing programs. It's a best practice to look at all of the data that we have available to us. We do get some information from our disability carrier, and my understanding is that DAS has a dashboard that they developed a few years ago that can really drill down into specifics around disability claims. And it would be a good idea for us to look at more closely at that. And the third bullet, work with carriers and vendors to develop formal referral procedures and process flows. So an example of that would be is if someone is out on a disability leave related to a workplace injury, that they can and should be connected to mental health support, because you can imagine someone who's got a disability that's preventing them from working may very well also have some concurrent mental health needs, depression, so forth. We want to make sure they get an ergonomic assessment of their workstation and maybe lifestyle coaching to support exercise and nutrition needs and a phased return to work opportunities. So that's just all part of, that holistic view of the employee and that holistic view of wellness. Next slide, please. Participation strategies. Pebb and Pmac are doing ongoing evaluation and revision of our health engagement model. That's the work you've been doing the last few years. So we need to continue doing that and finding lots of different ways for employees to participate in the programs using a variety of tools. With the hybrid and remote work environments, of course, online solutions have become the way to deliver material and content. So we have to look at that in addition to in-person services where appropriate. The opportunities in this section is to look at what our providers and our services are doing that are aligned with our health equity goals. If you haven't heard this before, health equity is priority 1 for Oregon Health Authority and for Pebb. And Pebb is engaging in several efforts currently to address health equity, including using a screening tool to look at programs, policies, and proposed benefit changes through the experience of our diverse members. Targeted communication when available to different populations, looking at how to deliver that in a variety of ways. We recognize that the new hybrid work arrangement is here to stay, and with it comes the opportunity to adapt promotions and communications to employees who aren't working in the traditional office setting where they may have been before. And that third bullet, provide manager training to support worksite wellness goals. Engaging managers into the wellness conversation is another way we can help more employees participate in programs. A formal statistical analysis on data that was collected from organizations that completed version 4 of the scorecard. My notes disappeared. Found that organizational and leadership support was identified as the practice most predictive of workplace well-being outcomes. And I mentioned that a few minutes ago on a previous slide, and I'll just repeat it again here. Organizational and leadership support was identified as the practice most predictive of workplace wellness outcomes. So it's really an important part of the workplace wellness and employee wellness is have leaders participate and managers participate in wellness, exemplify it, and support it by their actions. And next slide, please. This is the last section on measurement and evaluations. Pebb regularly monitors physical health risk data, healthcare utilization and cost data, and program participation data. We get lots of information from our carriers and from our vendors about how many people did we have in a WW program? How many people attended a webinar versus how many people signed up? How many people got to week 12 of a 16-week program, for example? We have a lot of data that we get, and we should continue looking at that. And these actions can be strengthened by developing a plan to share the information with stakeholders. So taking all that data and finding a way to put it into a story and into a way that our stakeholders can understand. It would also behoove us, I'm on the orange box here, to set goals for what metrics to improve and have a timeline and a process to evaluate progress. So taking all that data we get and putting it into a story and deciding which most we want to focus on and a timeline for improvement. And finally, pulling it all together in one place to say how it's all connected and telling the story of how Pebb is doing compared to health outcomes among its members. So next slide, please. Brian, are there any questions yet? Nope.
I've been changing the slides, so I have not seen any, but let me look at the chat. No, I think we're good.
Oh, Michael Garrett puts in a comment here. Health equity is Pebb's sole strategy. Thanks, Teresa, for emphasizing. Yeah, it is the priority from the governor's office on down for sure. So this slide here is one that you saw before. It's just a summary of those key recommendations based on what we saw with our scorecard results, is that we should use the scorecard to identify where we should focus our efforts and what's most relevant for improvement, and repeating it in the future, focusing on those two big high score opportunities of strategic planning and organizational culture and support, developing that written multi-year strategy and tactical roadmap. I think we can kind of check that off because we've developed it. We are still in the process of vetting it with our stakeholders. But again, when we conducted this Hero Scorecard, that work hadn't quite started yet. And next slide. I mentioned that we couldn't really do direct comparisons between 2019 and 2021 because the scorecard changed, but there are a few themes that we can kind of take a look at between those 2 years. So some comparisons between the two. That first bullet, with the pandemic came a lot more online and technological advances brought us more mobile applications and virtual delivery options for programs that weren't in existence in 2019. The second bullet, the perception of those who answered the scorecard questions in 2021, which was a different group than 2019, they decided that programs were more effective than they were in 2019. And that might have been just kind of the makeup of the group and the sense that they had. I don't have the specifics on the conversation that led up to deciding what point value or how to answer that specific question. The third bullet, safety is more integrated with health and well-being programs compared to when Pebb completed the survey and the scorecard in 2019. And this may be related to agencies that are adding wellness responsibilities to their existing safety manager roles, because some members of the Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council are agency safety managers or involved in risk management somehow. And because some agency wellness plans are including safety activities and goals in their wellness plan. Those are just examples of how health, well-being, and safety are a little more integrated than they were a few years ago. So that is the scorecard. Any questions?
So thinking out loud, Stephen is going to update the member well-being framework, and we are going to have him present those updates back to you guys in June, and then to the board. I'm thinking at that time next month, do we want to maybe see if there are any other potential work or bodies of types of recommendations that we'd want Pmac or the council to tackle? I'm thinking probably late summer, early fall through the rest of the year. Is that something community members would be interested in next month?
Brian, before we answer that, I want to jump in and make sure that Emily has a question. She's got her hand raised. So go ahead, Emily.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. That was an awesome presentation. Thank you. I'm so excited to learn more about this tool. I think it's so important to have a baseline and then see how much progress we can make. And I love Brian's question earlier about, how do we compare to other larger organizations like state government and being spread out as we are. And oh my gosh, every region of our state is so unique, right? Or the culture. So that will be interesting to kind of dig deeper and learn more about that. But I just had a question about, like, when you're talking about the roadmap, or you said tactile, you kept saying tactile. What was it? What was the language?
The tactical roadmap?
Yes. What do you mean by that? And probably because I'm the newest Pmac member, so I haven't heard all of the
I
earlier
think you're right,
members.
Emily. This is, I kept referring to some work that the Pmac and council have been involved in that came about kind of late in December and January. And this is with Mercer's help, developing we're calling it a well-being strategy that kind of delineates some roles of the Pmac versus the council over the next year or so to guide our work, showing where we work together and things that are commonly shared between the two groups, and then outlining separately what our roles are, and with timelines and measures along the way. And ultimately, the goal is to get our programs, our benefits, our services in front of members, increase utilization, and ultimately those improved health outcomes.
And so, Teresa, the technical roadmap is synonymous with what we call the member well-being framework, right?
Yes, that might be confusing. There's a few different components to that well-being framework. There's the tactical roadmap and there's the strategy itself. And Emily may not have copies of those. So I think what we need to do is to make sure maybe that goes out to folks either with the minutes or right after this meeting as a follow-up, along with that other document that I mentioned earlier about Wellness Manager FTE.
And maybe, Emily, I'll just jump in and describe it the way that I typically describe it when I talk about the contrast between strategy and tactics. So
Yeah.
strategy is the broad directional framework that one has. So what are the goals and objectives of the organization? What are the potential barriers that you'll be facing, and how do we plan to overcome those at a high level? And the tactics, or the tactical roadmap, flows from the strategy. So now we move from the high level to the more tactical level, which is detail oriented. So what are the specific things that we are going to do to achieve those strategic goals and objectives?
Got
Does
it.
that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Both of those responses helped me. Thank you so much. Yeah. I just had one last question about the slide, the equity. What was it? Oh, the participation strategy slide. So it says evaluate in the yellow box. It said evaluate providers and services for alignment with health equity goals. And then it's got that example with the Latina community, and I was just hoping that we would also have other communities that we would be looking at too, not just that's just like one example.
Which slide are you referring to?
Yeah, I think this is the one. Slide
This is
20.
yeah.
The one
Oh,
that
cool.
they just pulled up. Yeah. So that the yellow box, that sub bullet under that first bullet, it calls out the Latina community, which is awesome. But then I'm hoping that we're also going to look at other communities like the Indigenous and tribal and Black African American and Pacific Islander, Asian American, like all, and especially like some of those groups are faster growing right now, and may not, members may not speak English, or family members of members, and so yes, so I was just hoping that it would also be inclusive of other communities too.
Thank you for calling that out, Emily. I think the reason why it was listed there is that might be the largest priority population in the state of Oregon employment, but that doesn't mean it's more important or that we're going to ignore the rest of them. And speaking of those, the things that Pebb is doing with our carriers and our vendors, there's work happening behind the scenes, a lot of it with Mercer's help, to do screening of proposed benefit changes that are going to improve access and improve services to the priority populations. And there's also some work being done, and Michael Garrett might be able to speak more to this because I don't have the specific terminology. It's not an audit, but there are reviews that are being done with all of our carriers and our vendors and our programs, looking at specific equity measures. Oh, there's Michael. He popped up right there.
Yeah. So what Teresa's alluding to is in the current state health improvement plan, there are 5 prioritized populations. And so when I see the evaluate providers and services for alignment with health equity goals, when it addresses different communities within the state, we would have to make sure that we're looking at all 5 prioritized populations, which includes Black, Indigenous, people of color, Native American, Alaska Natives, that's all 1, people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus, low-wage workers, and people living in rural areas. So those are the 5 prioritized populations. So when we look at any policy or benefit programs, including but not limited to the wellness program, we need to look at it in the lens of how is this solution going to impact any of those 5 prioritized populations.
Could you repeat those, or could somebody put them in the chat? Or
yeah,
that would be great.
Or excuse me. Or another thought, Teresa, Brian, if it's okay to actually send out the state health improvement plan.
Yes.
I think that would be a better approach. So then that's just one portion of the state health improvement plan. There's many other aspects. There's some key strategies like behavioral health, for example, is a key.
Yeah.
Mental health is key, amongst other, addressing institutional racism. There's several key strategies. So I'm just pulling out some of the things that I'm like top of mind. But
okay.
Yeah, but we can definitely include that. So Pebb has aligned health equity with the state health improvement plan. So we're not off
Awesome.
anything else. And then
Yeah.
also the Oregon Health Authority has a health equity committee, and we could also send out the link to that as well, where you can get more information on the work that the OHA Health Equity Committee has done around this topic.
Oh, yes. No, that's, I think Marie Castro staffs that, right? Out of the,
I don't know.
our Office of Equity and Inclusion, our Division of Equity and Inclusion, the name is shifting. But yes, no, thank you for sharing that it's aligned with
Yeah.
the state health improvement plan. And I don't think I've read the most current version, like, as carefully as I probably should. So that would be great to see that. And thanks for the reminder.
Sure. No
I
problem.
just put the priority populations in the chat, and I'm going to put a link next to the Healthier Together Oregon report, which is the state's 2020-2024 health improvement plan.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Teresa,
That's
this might
Christy.
be,
Is that Christy Hudson?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Got it. Thank you for connecting those dots for me.
Teresa, this might be a good segue to mention the subscales for the HERO scorecard that we are working on for mental health, diversity, equity, inclusion, and social determinants of health. Would you like to describe it, or would you like me to?
Why don't you go ahead, Steve, and I'm going to copy and paste this link to Healthier Together Oregon in the chat.
Sure. So HERO and Mercer are currently working on developing subscores to the scores that you already saw in the HERO scorecard. You saw the 6 domains and then the overall scoring model that's there. And with Michael Garrett's help from Mercer and others on our Mercer team, as well as HERO's team and other experts across the country, are looking at questions that are already in the version 5 scorecard question set, identifying those that are associated with mental health, diversity, equity, inclusion, and social determinants of health. And we're going through an exercise to weight the responses of those different questions, again, to identify best practices that are in place. All that's going to result in a subscore. So you get an index, if you will, for how your organization is doing in the area of mental health, in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, in the area of social determinants of health. We're still vetting and going through final peer review on each of those subscores and the scoring for them right now, but we'll have those available soon. And we will manually calculate those for Pebb, because you've already taken the scorecard. Now we're going to have to do that manually in a retrospective way, but we can do that, and we will do that. And that information will inform as well from what Michael already said about the health equity tool and other resources to, again, provide us a roadmap and some milestones that we can use as a baseline now and comparators into the future.
That's awesome to hear that there's going to be a focus on behavioral health. I think, we have these once in a generation investments in behavioral health in Oregon from the last 2 legislative sessions and such. And so anyways, yes, thank you for that.
Okay, so looking. So again, it sounds like if the committee doesn't mind, what we will do is among our presentations next month, we'll have Stephen come back and present some updates to the member wellbeing framework, and maybe Teresa, Stephen, and I can think of maybe how to tee it up and include some of the technical guide information just to provide context around kind of the high level body of work. But I think we'll focus for this group and the council probably on the well-being framework, if that makes sense. Any other thoughts from the committee, either committees? Did anything in this presentation change the way you're thinking about priorities, about future work? Thoughts? Going once, going twice. Okay. To me, Emily.
Sorry. it's great to see these scores and where we're kind of lower, and then like you all said, the what the organizational cultural support, right? Yeah, so I agree that I feel like there's more of a movement towards looking at that more carefully. And, just with the other role I play as the co-chair of the People of Color Employee Resource Group, and through the Employee Resource Group kind of community, for sure we are looking at those organizational and cultural supports and how that could be improved for our members' well-being. So yeah, I like that direction.
And it felt like when I heard listen to the report to the board, it just felt to me like the conversations that Pmac and the council have been having for the past year and a half are completely consistent with what the scorecard is highlighting, is consistent with what we've initially developed with the member well-being framework. So it felt like to me, I'm starting to hear all these kind of consistent themes over the past couple of years, which is a good thing. It feels like
it's a really good thing.
We're starting to align our work between the two committees, getting recommendations in front of the board. So, just continue for the committee members, continue thinking about how these sorts of updates, impact your current thinking, because we can always, shift as needed. And this is actually the focus on kind of the cultural and organizational support's a great segue into our next topic. If there are no other questions for Stephen and Teresa. Oh yeah, Emily.
Yeah, I was just also going to say, I'm lead staff, or I have been at OHA for Cultural Competence Continuing Ed for healthcare professionals. And it's also kind of in alignment with that body of work, because we've talked a lot about, training the providers. But once you train the providers and you put them into an institution, organization that's not culturally competent, it doesn't really go anywhere. So it's like you definitely need that organizational cultural competence in this case, in addition with training the individual provider to be more culturally competent. So that's another reason I like that direction. And I think others would like it as well.
Hey, Emily, it's Michael again. I'm going to offer up for you to attend a presentation tomorrow our own Teresa Cross is doing on health equity. Right, Teresa, for OHA? Isn't that tomorrow? Yeah. So hopefully you can attend that. And it might be we invite you as a guest to one of our health equity workgroup meetings and just chat more about what we're doing for Pebb. I think that would be really great. And thank you for bringing up cultural competency and really cultural humility, is where we want to get to, right? Ultimately. But Pebb has been working on this for 2 years, and the first step was just to get the plans to identify or ask for self-identification on a voluntary basis for providers for race and ethnicity, amongst other demographics. So they are all now working. That was initial focus. Then some are now focusing on sexual orientation, gender identity, and potentially other demographics. So we have intersectionality, from providers. I think also I'm seeing medical plans are offering cultural competency training, and the incentive is like provide free continuing medical education, CMEs, to the providers if they go through it. So I think coming at this from a number of ways, to your point, is really important. So at the health system, the health plan, as well as individual providers.
Yeah, and now we have a mandate. We have a law that makes cultural competence continuing ed a requirement for healthcare professionals. And so if that isn't achieved, they can't practice in our state, those providers. And I think the CCO, the updated 5-year contract, also has some cultural competence continuing ed requirements in there as well. So yeah.
This is Steve. I have just a quick question. In terms of, say, the public sector side of things, I know at one point when you guys were talking about, like, the larger organizations might have an FTE wellness coordinator, and maybe the smaller ones would just assign it to one of their existing staff. Is there any kind of maybe a brief report out on how those agencies are doing. Have all the agencies participated in one form or another by either establishing the actual coordinator FTE and or assigning it to someone in their in a smaller organizations. And I say that only because I guess my concern is, like people will see, oh, this is what we need to do, and then they'll kind of say they'll check the box, and they think, but there's no real activity happening behind it. There's no motivation to actually participate or get the agency involved in it, but they're meeting the requirements of what's been laid out. And so I guess I'm kind of asking it with that slant in mind, but I just wanted to get a sense of how some of the agencies are participating or not participating, if you have that.
I can say a little bit about it, Steve, because that's all I know is a little bit. You might not have heard at the beginning of the meeting that I reported to the board the steps that were taken to implement Pmac and the board's recommendation that large agencies have FTE dedicated to wellness, and a document that outlines why they should want to, the benefits of it, and the benefits at the Department of Corrections, because they do have dedicated FTE to wellness. They have a half-time wellness manager that's going to be a full-time position this year. Trying to get information from individual agencies about what they're doing has not been easy. We conducted a survey but didn't get a whole lot of response. And I don't know if that necessarily means they're not doing anything. We did ask in early May if they were actively taking steps to in their budget process for the 23-25 biennium to dedicate FTE towards wellness, if they were looking at putting that into their policy option packages. And we heard from 3 different agencies. 2 big ones said yes, conversations were being had at the leadership level. They weren't willing to put in writing any more detail about that, like, yes, we've got it in our policy option package. So I don't think that just because we aren't being told what's happening doesn't mean nothing's happening. I'm in touch with all executive branch agencies because they are submitting agency wellness plans, and they have wellness coordinators who contact me and say, hey, do you have this, or can I have that, or can you direct me to such and such? So I do get a sense of what's going on in individual agencies, and I know that each one has someone that's tasked with wellness. It might be a dedicated portion of their FTE. It might be an add-on to what they're already doing, like an HR manager. But I don't have really specific information about what's happening agency by agency.
Okay, that's good. That's okay. Thanks.
Okay, so any final thoughts for Teresa and Stephen before we move on to the next topic? Okay, thanks, guys. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we're due for a break, but I'm going to tee up the next part of the discussion first, and then we'll quickly escape. I think we may be able to, we're a little bit ahead of the agenda, and I think we may adjourn early, but we'll see how this discussion goes. So we're going to move on to the EAP related recommendations for Pmac to consider moving forward. I do have a document to share later on, but for now, I am just going to kind of lay the groundwork for our discussion. So over the past few months, we've heard a lot about what our membership is going through, the types of barriers and obstacles they face when trying to get care and services that they and their families need, the types of issues that have presented to Canopy through our EAP benefits that we provide. And we've also heard from Canopy themselves about EAP utilization, which programs and services are available but not used as much as they could be used, what Canopy has observed about our members, and what types of requests they receive from agencies that are outside of the scope of Pebb's EAP contract. So all of this information has led to, I think, numerous potential recommendations that both Pmac and the Council have informally identified up to this point, probably over the last 3 to 4 months. But at the same time, some of these potential recommendations may not fit neatly into either Pmac or the Coordinating Council, since there is some overlap. So long story short, in terms of the plan of attack, we've identified to divide the potential EAP related recommendations that Teresa and I have, kind of written down and put aside the past few months. We've tried to divide those potential EAP related recommendations just into two buckets. Ones that the Pmac could kind of take the lead on recommending, and ones that the coordinating council could take the lead on recommending. So the first thing that I'm going to ask this group to do is weigh in and informally approve how we've proposed dividing up the work between the two committees. And then what we'll do is we'll have a conversation about the recommendations that we've specifically identified for Pmac, and talk about next steps and what sort of recommendations you may want to tee up directly from this committee. So with that said, I think let's take a 5-minute break. When we return, I'm going to talk about how we divided up the recommendations, the rationale. We'll go over the recommendations, and then we'll ask for feedback. So we will reconvene, how about at 2:24? Everyone, finish your stretches and your calisthenics. We'll get started in another minute. Yeah, Teresa, I tried to grab a bite to eat. I had some bananas I bought yesterday. And talking about disappointment, they looked ripe. I peeled it off a bit and they were still kind of hard. And I'm not down with that.
True confession, today, actually this week, but especially today's been kind of crazy. So this morning I went to one of my favorite coffee shops and got a little yogurt bowl for this morning to have with my tea. And then they also have these really, really beautiful salads. So I picked one of those up for my lunch too, because I knew I was doing yoga at noon, and then I could just eat my salad during Pmac.
Yeah, I need to start planning ahead. You think working from home more often would make it more convenient, but I found it's just as bad, if not worse, if I don't try to think a little bit ahead of time.
Well, if I don't cook a whole lot, but when I do, I always make enough for 2 or 3 meals.
Okay, so we are ready to pick back up the EAP discussion related to potential recommendations. As I'd mentioned before the break, there's some I think there's always going to be some content and responsibility overlap between the coordinating council and Pmac, and that's okay. What Teresa, Mercer, and I are trying to do is just coordinate the work and make sure we're all moving together in a way that's kind of aligned and we're supporting each other's work. And so I think the first thing I wanted to talk about today is just how to generally divide up these potential EAP recommendations and other recommendations moving forward. Given that there are overlapping charges and roles for the committees, I think the easiest thing to do is just propose a really high-level general framework that could help us figure out how to divide up the work. And then we'll just have the 2 committees essentially take action and agree on the assignments that they want to pick up or assign to each other. To that end, in terms of the general framework, in my mind, the council is mostly or primarily focused on environment, the culture, and as such may have more of a focus or interest in working with like HR and management to implement policies that support a better and healthier work environment. While at the same time, I see Pmac as having more of a primary interest in things that are more directly member facing. So I'm thinking things like open enrollment communications that go directly to members, or benefit changes that directly impact what members can or can't receive from Pebb. But again, knowing that even these 2 categories are not exactly mutually exclusive, I think we just do our best to divide up the work based on those principles, and then to ask both committees to approve their respective assignments. So let me stop there. Let me open it up for Pmac and council members. Does that sound generally about right? Does that make sense to you in terms of how to generally divide up potential recommendations among the 2 groups? Any thoughts? And again, the main principle would be that we would look to first is if something is more member facing, it would probably land in Pmac's lap, and if something was more going to environment or the organizational items or culture, then they would probably go to the Worksite Wellness Council. And then once Teresa and I divvy up the potential recommendations or assignments based on that principle, we would ask each group then to confirm that they would agree with those assignments. So yay, nay, you guys like that idea? Do you have any different thoughts? I see a hand raised. And who is that? It's taking a second to pull it up. Oh, Angela.
Yeah, So I really like the recommendation. My one suggestion is that we have an ongoing report out of what the other group recommended. So
Okay.
after they've evaluated, made the recommendation, that maybe even if it's not a full agenda item, that we maybe get a copy of like what their considerations were that brought them to that recommendation and what that outcome was. Because I think that'll help us stay in alignment along the way.
So do you think maybe like just a high level, maybe document that's rolled up for both groups that tracks at a high level the assignments, recommendations, and then the supporting stuff for each of those?
Yep, exactly. Just a way to, for those of us that are like, hold on, there might be some overlap, that gives us a chance to look at those kind of supporting documents and understand what they were considering, as well as maybe ask to reach out and coordinate if there is something where we have crossover.
Yep. And to that end, are folks comfortable with us continuing to invite council members to Pmac meetings as optional attendees and vice versa? Given that, again, there's going to be overlap, and we want people who are interested and available to attend to feel free to attend and to have the bigger picture. So do you feel comfortable being invited as optional attendees to each other's meetings?
Yes, this is Emily. I would feel comfortable with that. And I also support what Angela recommended because I definitely am interested in both member facing and organizational changes. So, yeah.
Okay. And again, we're not always going to be able to divide them. There's going to be overlap. So it's really just kind of like just a framework to use our best guess, and then to have each of the committees kind of confirm what we're thinking. I think I heard Steve speak up too. Sorry, Steve.
I was just in favor of the inviting from both groups to the same meetings. It makes sense to me for sure.
Okay. And if any of the council members want to speak up, please feel free. This is for you guys as well. Okay, so I think we have a general plan. And again, what I'm going to do for the rest of today's discussion, I'm not going to ask Pmac to take formal action. I think we will figure out how to bring this, some of the formal items back to Pmac in June's meeting to have a vote. So for now, I'm just going to try to get a sense of what the committee's thinking and if there's a general consensus. So in terms of dividing up the recommendations by applying that principle and process, so far we've identified a number of potential EAP related recommendations. So we've talked about recommending that registering for whole life directions with Canopy, or even reaching out to Canopy for any reason, could count as 1 or 2 health actions under HEM. There could be recommendations related to how EAP could promote their program or directly send communications to members either through Pebb or through some other mechanism. We have also talked about recommending that the board initiate a contract renewal process with Canopy that would be effective next July 2023, and that would potentially result in different service level and more robust service level lineups, in addition to adding hours available to participating agencies to use for things like training and critical incident stress debriefings. And then we also talked about recommending that our team, the Pebb contracts team, work with DOJ to see if we can come up with like a pre-approved contract template that agencies could use to purchase supplemental EAP benefits that are outside of the Pebb contract. And the whole notion being, if it's pre-approved by DOJ, it would remove hopefully a lot of the barriers and challenges that agencies have had historically to directly contracting for things that Pebb doesn't provide. So those are the 4 kind of big, I think, bodies of potential EAP recommendations that we have identified so far. So I'm going to pull up now a document that just lays that out. And then I've also included who I think, based on the principles we just discussed, who I think could kind of be the lead in making that recommendation. And so it feels to me that Pmac, in terms of recommending that registering for whole life directions or reaching out to Canopy could count as a health action would definitely be a Pmac thing. That's a member-facing program, and it's kind of within the scope of what Pmac has done in previous years. The next one, again, recommending next steps for EAP-related communications. I think that one feels like a kind of a Pmac-led sort of recommendation. And that would involve, would you like our staff to work with Canopy to identify communication materials for our members based on what we've heard from Canopy and others up to this point? Would you like Canopy to reach out to one or more ERGs? Would you like them to make any efforts to, disseminate or distribute their promotional materials that they've already developed in a different manner? That third recommendation feels like this is really a Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council item, because it's really talking about what the available programs and services would be under EAP. And it just feels like, since we really want to encourage management and leadership to promote EAP, that the council would be an appropriate body to consider what that recommendation, or to handle that recommendation and consider it to move it to the Pebb board. And I think that the same thing would apply to the recommendation that staff work with DOJ to explore whether a DOJ-approved contract template can be produced specifically for agencies to purchase EAP services not under our price agreement. That one, again, feels like a Worksite Wellness Coordinating Council-led recommendation, because, again, it's talking about the overall structure, organizational infrastructure, and just trying to make accessibility to HR and employees, or improve accessibility of EAP benefits to HR folks and employees. So let me take a step back, and I think all this fits on one page. Are there any thoughts or reaction to those proposed assignments? Do they feel about right? Do the assignments feel about right? Any thoughts or comments from either Pmac or the council?
Well, I mean, this is Steve. I'll take a shot. I think the way you broke it down and who which group you assigned it to seems appropriate to me, for sure. I mean, 1 and 2 for Pmac is certainly in the wheelhouse of what we've been doing for these last few years, so that makes perfect sense. And we haven't really been on the contract side as much. We may want to see things happen with the contract, but we haven't directly, involved ourselves in any of the actual, contract renewals or, extending the contracts. So if that is something that's in the Wellness Coordinating Council's wheelhouse, I hope it is, because, it does seem like it's a stretch for Pmac to be involved in that at this point.
Yeah. And again, based on what we've discussed so far, Pmac would still be included, would still report out. And also, with the way the two committees will likely work together going forward, just because something is assigned to Pmac, that doesn't mean when Pmac is entertaining that recommendation that they think that, hey, maybe we want to send this to the council to get some additional feedback. So that is something that is permissible. So anyways, thanks for the feedback, Steve. Any other feedback from Pmac members or council members, Emily?
Yeah, I really like this, and I like number 4 especially. I think that could really help streamline and eliminate a lot of pain points currently, at least at the OHA side, and then also with ERGs, for example, when they're trying to do some innovative, culturally based things and create partnerships. Yeah, for sure. I think that the pre-approved contract template will. I mean, assuming that the ERG program would adopt that, integrate it, into their into the work. I think that would be great. It would help a lot.
And that is something we heard over the past 3 to 4 months. Is there has been a lot of need for agencies to purchase things that are over and above what Pebb provides under the contract. And given that this need seems to have been continuous or constant for the past few years, given everything going on, it just feels like one thing we could do is make sure, or try to make it so that agencies don't have to go through every single procurement rule and practice from scratch every time they identified a need outside of our contract, for us to front load that work and do it. Because again, these types of services, they're not ones that agencies will necessarily be able to predict. They're very reactive, and our procurement process at the state is not very reactive. It is very much long and plodding and includes a lot of checks and balances, and doesn't really line up well with that sort of immediate need. And so the way we take care of it is we work with DOJ to kind of take care of those legal approvals up front. So that's something that I personally heard as a contracts person through the past 3 or 4 months, and feels like it could benefit a lot of agencies. And I will say it's something I completely support, but will be a lot of work for our staff, for my staff, which is okay, because this is one of those projects where I think it could really potentially benefit the agencies who do end up having a need that they cannot foresee or predict.
And I think especially as everyone's pivoting to like remote work and hybrid work, I think it's a lot of unanticipated things on the horizon.
Yep.
I think DOJ will probably appreciate this too, so they aren't peppered by lots of different agencies wanting the same thing, and they'll already have that template that they can that they know is DOJ approved. So it definitely expedites everything from Pebb to agencies to DOJ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very proactive. Thank you.
Yeah, so any other thoughts about the recommendations we've identified and how we've divvied them up between the 2 committees? It sounds like so far we have some general support of what we've teed up for you guys to consider. Any other thoughts, whether in support or different ideas? Okay. So I think that gives us what we need for now, just in terms of direction. And again, we'll firm up formal decisions next month, assuming we have a quorum. So I think for now that we've decided how to divvy up the recommendations, I do want to talk a little bit about the recommendations we just identified for Pmac. So let me make sure that document. Yep, we're at the very top. So that would be recommendations 1 and 2. I thought that we could have a little somewhat of an unstructured, open-ended conversation about those 2 recommendations, and what Pmac thought about what you may want to move forward, what you may want staff to bring back next month for your consideration. So under the health actions, you've previously expressed interest in highlighting EAP outreach as a health action under HEM. We've done something like that in the past, so this is something that is completely appropriate and something that the committee has done before. What are your guys' thoughts about doing the same thing this time around? Is we would highlight that reaching out to Canopy would be considered, 1 to 2 health actions. And if that's something you support, would you want staff maybe to reach out to Canopy to see how they think it could be best be structured, and bring back a specific recommendation to you? For example, something like, registering for whole life directions count as 2 health actions, and just reaching out to Canopy for anything, any reason at all counts as 1. So what do you guys think? Do you guys feel like you're ready to talk about those, or do you want staff to bring up some for you to choose from, or what are your thoughts?
So this is Gayla, and I just had a thought. Will this make people feel like that it's not confidential anymore? Because I get a lot of questions about that, and I'm always reassuring people that, hey, this is confidential. Nobody's going to know that you contacted them unless you tell your supervisor or your coworkers. No, there's no way that we get anything. And so my one concern would be, we would want to make sure that, that people are reassured of the confidentiality, because it's a big piece. It's a big piece of.
And that's a good point. And And Gayla, your comment goes to more than just this specific recommendation. So stepping back, if Pmac wants to highlight reaching out to Canopy as a health action, I think that's a great idea, Gayla, that however we communicate that to members, we reiterate that, one, we don't audit health actions, so we're not going to know that you in fact went to EAP. And then just generally, Pebb staff are not privy to EAP member specific utilization. So we're not going to know, your supervisor's not going to know unless you tell him or her that you're doing that. And then also, again, for in general, I think that's another thing to keep in mind, Gayla. If worries about confidentiality is a barrier that we haven't really identified and addressed yet, that maybe in any EAP communications we identify, we make sure that we call out that confidentiality piece, and that literally Canopy and the provider is going to be the only one that knows what you're utilizing.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You know, include that information about the confidentiality and any communication about EAP for sure.
Okay. Thanks, Gayla. And I think there was a hand raised for a second, but no longer. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, that was Angela. I was just going to say I also agree both with the confidentiality and the suggestion that reaching out or registering for these programs makes sense to count as health actions. And I think that if that was to be implemented under our current HEM model as, potential actions, it would be important to somehow caveat, so that somebody doesn't have to say, I reached out to Canopy, but that they would say, I did one of these 3 things, and one of them might be reaching out to Canopy. So it's, obscured amongst a set of choices that they made. And then for our future health model recommendation, similarly, making sure that if that's data that connected in the background or whoever we got that information, that we had continued reminders of that confidentiality of information that's shared in our kind of health engagement tools.
Perfect. Thank you, Angela. And Angela, what do you think, and other Pmac members, how should I say this? I think, there's different options. Again, we could highlight whole life directions registration as 2, reaching out to Canopy as 1 or 2. Do we want to reach out to Cascade and say, hey, what do you think? What recommendation do you think will move the needle most for you guys? You want to turf it to them and see what Cascade thinks? Or Canopy, sorry.
I mean, I'd be curious to hear what they have to say to that question. Yeah.
Okay. Because if their feedback would be helpful, I think I can work with Canopy to see what they think, and then just know at the June meeting, I can bring back a very specific recommendation based on that feedback that I received from them. So that way, what I bring to you guys next month is just a lot more specific and actionable.
I would agree with that. This is Gayla, because I think that they should have some ideas, and it would be really good to hear from them.
Yeah, because if they just think we just want people to start calling us, then maybe we don't even want to highlight anything about whole life directions. Maybe we just want to say, hey, if you reach out to Canopy just to find out what they offer this year, it counts as 2 health actions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, because I mean, I've always found them to be really receptive in answering any questions. Because I mean, when I do quite a few presentations to groups within our agencies, OHA and DHS, and so I've just asked them questions about, hey, just want to clarify that that I'm telling people the right thing. And so I mean, I let people know, hey, they've always been really receptive, and if you have any kind of a question about any of the things that we talked about today, that you should call them, because there's no reason not to. It's confidential and it's free.
And in my mind, just based on what we've heard about EAP, it seems like the more people we can get to be exposed to what EAP offers, that utilization will increase, because folks just don't know all the things they offer that can help. But it's just how do we break down the stigma and barriers so that people want to call Canopy and don't feel like you know, oh, it's only for people that are in crisis, you know.
Well, and one other thing that I've always thought was a little bit odd, and in our agencies, I have always been the one that does the presentations, and there were always hours that you could get per year, and we always felt like, well, gosh, we want to save our hours for the specialized training, but I always thought it was kind of odd that, well, why do you make us use an hour if we want you to be somewhere and tell about your services? And so why would you make an agency use their hours for just that? Which, I mean, there's value in that, but it just feels like, don't you want to promote yourself, and don't you want to, you know, for Canopy, don't you want to, you know, get the word out that you're there, or are you wanting to be secret? And so I always thought that was a little strange, but that's just
yeah. Yeah, and some of it is in the contract. We have to kind of draw a line between what they're required to do and what they're not required to do. So part of that is because we have over 100 agencies and, you know, tens of thousands of members. It's making sure that we're not unintentionally requiring Cascade to take on work that they're not being paid for. You know, in terms of just volume.
Yeah.
You know, I will say, they're almost always willing to go present, but I think there's also, I think there's probably a lot of improvement we can do by partnering with Canopy to better explain what's available to participating agencies, what is included and what's not included under Pebb's contract. And maybe that's part of this council recommendation. If the council wants my team to move forward and come up with a DOJ pre-approved contract template for these sorts of things, maybe part of that project is upfront spelling out exactly what agencies can get under Pebb, and then letting them know for everything else, we have this mechanism that we've developed for, you know, to ease purchasing those additional things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Other thoughts, ideas?
Ryan, this is Stephen. Just to go back to the mechanics of the reporting or the acknowledgement of someone doing an EAP related service for the HEM model. I think some of it depends upon whether it continues to be a self-report only.
Yeah.
And if it's self-report, then nobody else will know. You can report it. If it is something that at some point in time needs to be verified, I have clients where there's hypersensitivity around confidentiality that have put in place an opt-in process where the individual expressly says that you can tell your organization, you can report to the administrator, the third-party administrator, that I did something for the sake of getting an incentive, but not what it is. So there are mechanisms that could be put into place. There's some administrative burden around something like that. But going back to the point that right now, I think the HEM model is set up so that it's a self-report. And in that case, no one's going to verify, no one's going to say anything.
Yeah, and I have not heard anything that would lead me to suspect that even has a possibility of changing this coming open enrollment. So, because that would be a huge operational lift to go from just a self-reported to an audited type of program. So for this year, the recommendation, just know if we're making health action recommendations under HEM related to EAP and Canopy, it won't be audited. It's self-reported, which ties into, again, Gayla's comment about just making sure we're clear that it's confidential. Okay, other thoughts on that specific recommendation? So the second one is
Brian,
this
is
oh,
Teresa. Real quick, I just wanted to bring your attention to the comment. Angela had to step away and thought she was going to miss the rest of the discussion. So for question 2, she said, I would like to hear from Canopy about their typical effective communication tools that they offer to clients and what is available to us under our current contract with them. And Emily also agrees with that recommendation.
Yeah, and so that was for the discussion. I did not have a specific recommendation on open enrollment or communications. It felt like I wanted to get a sense from you all about whether we wanted to go back to Cascade and say, hey, based on what you've presented and what you've heard, do you have something you would like Pmac to consider presenting, or do you have ideas for maybe different promotional efforts we could engage in leading up to this open enrollment? So for both Pmac and the council, would you like me to take that same approach on that recommendation, where I'll reach out to Canopy to see if they have any strong thoughts or ideas, and whether they do or not, we'll add that to staff's thoughts and bring back to you in June a more specific, actionable recommendation?
Yeah, this is Steve. I definitely agree with that. I would think that Canopy, because I think we have said it many times in many different settings about more information about Canopy, more information about EAP. Because we know there's a broader range, and I have the sense that Canopy does have some sort of I don't want to say a PowerPoint presentation about their range of services, but it might be something like that they can make available, say in the month before open enrollment, as we start to gear into it, that, hey, as we come out with open enrollment, we just want to make sure that everybody understands what services are there and the range of services. It's the range of services, because again, initially everyone's take on EAP, when it was EAP and now Canopy, was more around the mental health aspect, which again, absolutely valuable, but people just didn't realize that they had this whole menu of other services that they provide. And as people have found out that they do, they've been very excited and really grateful for it. So I think it's just a matter of getting that, make sure those communications get out to everyone as they go into open enrollment.
Yeah, and figuring out, are there different ways to provide those communications, or different forum? What's the plural of forums? Is it fora? Like, it just sounds weird. Fora? Anyways. Sorry, I just totally distracted myself. So part of it is also figuring out, okay, we know that in terms of Pebb communications, that, not that we're limited in what we can do, but that certain percentage of members aren't going to pay attention, if it comes from Pebb. And so I'd be interested to know from Canopy and others, are there ideas such as Canopy, like training the trainers? Is there like an HR group of HR staff statewide where if Canopy could present, develop or provide materials that they already have developed to let members know how to access it, where they would train HR staff or do a training specifically for HR staff to say, this is how you can communicate, this is what you need to know to tell members. And again, just thinking out loud, do we want to ask Canopy for ideas about, just different ways to deliver that information? Just thoughts.
Yeah, for me, there's, so much email volume for the state workers, especially many of those teams are understaffed right now. For OHA and ODHS, I think like at OHA we have over 300 vacancies, and then ODHS it's like a few hundred more than that. And so I know some of my colleagues have 3,000 emails, and they're so behind, and they're not going to catch up. So yeah, I think we need to look at different communication. I mean, email is still good, and again, there's like 5 generations, in our workforce at least, and so some generations, well, email is good, but then we need additional things, especially for the younger generation also. And I think those warm touches, like I don't know, face to face, or just like integrate it into different types of conversations that we know are happening across our agencies. Just being more creative about how to, I agree with everything that everybody said already. Asking what the menu is that Canopy has for different types of communication, but something in addition to email. Also, the Oregon State Hospital, most of those staff do not have computers and can't access email. And so how do we would love help, the ERG community, we would love help as to how to communicate with the Oregon State Hospital employees.
Okay. And that's a good need to know about, because that's something we could take to Canopy
And
Um,
that's our biggest chunk of our OHA workforce,
Yeah.
of all the different divisions. And there's over 400 staff of color there. And they're just not getting any of our emails even, right?
Yeah.
This is Teresa. I wanted to just echo what Emily just said, how important it is to reach the employees who aren't in a traditional office setting with a computer in front of them. Oregon State Hospital is one, and of course, all of the agencies that have people out in the field, ODOT, Fish and Wildlife, Ag, Parks and Rec. But one of the things that was outlined in the document explaining to HR managers and budget people at agencies why they would want a wellness manager was what the Department of Corrections was able to get out of their having FTE devoted to wellness. And one of those things was a program that helped get materials into the hands of employees and conversation guides that were developed for managers to have with employees, because like the state hospital, Department of Correction folks don't sit in front of computers. In fact, they have to lock up their cell phones in their locker when they get on shift. They can't even walk around the floor if they're, guards with a cell phone. So another group of employees with challenges to get information into their hands. And I just wanted to make sure that folks saw the comment that Michael put in the chat was we should consider asking Canopy how they support members with vision loss, hearing loss, and limited English proficiency for their open enrollment and overall benefit communications.
Okay.
I have to say that also that applies to the stabilization and crisis unit, that most of those people do not have computers, and so they are very similar to OSH and what you talked about for corrections. And so I wanted to just bring that up, that, yeah, and so we have to really be creative, because you're right. Using emails is not the answer to the whole piece. And we have to look at different ways and how we involve the employee resource groups, because it's a huge resource to the agency. And so, and those are, they're all people that are coming from different areas, and they're different mindsets. And so I think it's really, we've had lots of conversations about how we tap into those groups to, be some information, guidance, and getting the word out.
Okay. So
You're on
Emily,
mute, Emily.
I just wanted to add, I wish we were in person, you guys. But anyway, I just wanted to piggyback off of what Gayla said. Like, there's so many different types of ERGs. I mean, the WISE ERG, 50-year-olds and above, like the AbleNet, for people with disabilities. I've heard that they're just stellar in terms of like helping people come up with solutions and being creative. And then there's also like the People ERG at OHA, which is like people with experience with mental health. So I mean, there's all these different, ERGs are for those groups that have been historically marginalized. And so it is a very rich resource to tap into, for sure.
Great. So far, I'm hearing pretty clear and consistent direction. And I think primarily it is, let's go back to the expert Canopy and see what they would potentially recommend and to bring back to Pmac for both recommendations in June, as well as checking in with staff and rounding up potential other recommendations to bring back. I think this gives me what I need for Pmac. Let's look at, are there any other comments on the EAP related recommendations? Okay, so I'm going to share a portion of my talking points document, because I kind of laid out the next few months. And frankly, I don't need to just read it. So the next steps and meeting adjournment were a little early on the agenda. as you can see. So obviously a lot going on this year. We're going to make sure that Pmac and council members continue to be invited to each other's committee meetings to keep the coordination going. Okay, so at June's council meeting, we have identified providing a hero scorecard results recap, high level, having Canopy do a 15-minute presentation, and then having the council discuss those two recommendations that Teresa and I will facilitate that conversation. And those two recommendations are about the Cascade contract renewal that could include updated service levels and additional hours with an H, and I'm going to correct it. Yes. Available to agencies. And then also to potentially recommend that contract staff work with DOJ to explore a pre-approved contract template that agencies could use. So if we then go to June's Pmac meeting, we do have a couple more items we'll add, and that will be EAP specific recommendations based on my follow-up with Canopy. We'll have Stephen present updates to the member well-being framework and provide a little more context about the tactical guide and roadmap that we had mentioned earlier today. We're going to have the medical carriers each address a number of questions that Mercer sent to them before our discussion started, including, do you proactively reach out to members about the programs that they presented? If there's a diagnosis or determined need, does a letter or call go out? And you can see the other questions that we've asked the medical carriers to prepare for. And then we'll have Cindy present a high-level open enrollment communications plan about how Pebb is planning to deliver high-level communications to Pebb members this year. And that is something we've done in the years past. Then, assuming that we land on some approved recommendations in June from both Pmac and the council, then I would present the Pmac recommendations related to EAP outreach and as health actions to the board in July. We would probably have Teresa present the council recommendations regarding the EAP renewal process and contracting activities. And then I think we'll have Stephen present the updated member wellbeing framework as well. And then I think after that, we will try to cancel July's Pmac meeting if we don't have any other action items leading up into open enrollment. And then I think we will then bring everyone back together in August to do, I think this is the third year, we will have a combined coordinating council and Pmac meeting that we invite staff and management and everyone to, where we cover a lot of broad-based information about insurance and about Pebb's business. And this year, I think we're going to probably reduce the amount of time spent presenting canned reports and spend a little more time on recapping all the health equity work we've done the past year, looking at the member wellbeing framework, and then talking about how, again, the two committees want to move forward for the remainder of the year. And I did see a hand. I thought it was Emily, was it?
Yes, yeah. Thanks, Brian. That's helpful to see what you're thinking for the future. And then also I was reminded in the chat by when General Johnson made the comment about Canopy having an app, I was reminded of Uplift Oregon and just like, how can we partner with them to improve the communication? Because I actually have some direct experience with them now. I'm helping to do new employee orientations specific to the union, but it's part of the Uplift Oregon, like Uplift Your Benefits. And they do such a great job, like explaining our benefits that I've been at OHA for over 10 years and I didn't know all of that information until I, heard just the way that they deliver the message, I think is very effective.
And I think we will continue inviting Uplift Oregon to both the PMAC council meetings. We do meet with them offline outside of these meetings, and since
Okay.
they're on the line rather than talking about them in the third person, I suspect that, and we'll reiterate this, but we'll just continue to invite them to be part of this conversation. So, General and Kelly and Denisha, as your team has ideas, during PMAC or council discussions, feel free to jump in and speak up and share ideas and thoughts. I think one of the things that Teresa and I want to accomplish with these groups is just to make sure that it's a forum where, all the stakeholders who are invited feel free to participate, and make it just an open forum, a great dialogue. And I think we've done a good job of having that so far. So for the Uplift Oregon team, again, feel free to speak up when you have ideas, or even to connect with Teresa and I offline if there are ideas you have that you think maybe are premature for the committee or council that you want to vet with us first. That is acceptable too. Other thoughts, ideas, comments?
Hey, Brad, this is Michael again. Does everybody know what Uplift Oregon does? Maybe before we say give us ideas, maybe we explain what their role is. I don't know. Maybe everybody knows who and what they are.
Well, I think that would be Kelly. Do you want to give a not to put you on the spot, or Denisha? Anyone offered to give an overview? No?
Can figure out how to navigate my stuff.
There you go.
Oh, there you are.
Sorry about that.
It's all good. Right at the end of the meeting, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, hey guys.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to speak. And so we're a trust partnership with the state of Oregon, SEIU 503, and ASME Council 75. And to bring education programs in the three core areas of benefits, wellness, and equity. And so we're heavily putting a lot of our resources and benefits and wellness programs right now. And what we have accomplished up until this date is running we call it the UIB, Uplift Your Benefits Workshop for new employees. And right now we serve, 72 agencies, departments, and commissions of the state. I think it's about 43,000 employees, but really we're targeting only new employees. So that's about 180 new employees per week. We geared this workshop for, it talks about all of the Pebb benefits, all of the PERS benefits in an hour in 90 minutes. And then they have a 30-minute union portion. So it's a 2-hour workshop that we're doing, and we're about anywhere from a 65 to 70% reach level right now.
And then as a trust, so basically, to boil it down, and sorry, I may be completely wrong here, but you're like a private organization, but it's different because you're a trust. So the beneficiaries are probably state employees or new state employees. Is it funded by DAS or the state? And your primary state contact in the legal relationship is DAS, right?
Okay, yes, that's our administrator, to make sure that all of our workshops are available for state workers. But how it's funded is that each agency pours into us as a bucket for every employee, and the amount can change. Don't quote me on the amount right about now, but that is how our program is funded. Yes.
And I think it's good for folks to know, because it's how should I say this? Kind of like our partners at Mercer, we treat you more as really a direct partner than than even a stakeholder. It's just a slightly different feel of relationship, kind of like we have with Mercer. And so that's why I wanted you to kind of explain part of that. And even despite all the legal setup, I think the practical reality for Pebb and Uplift Oregon has been we meet regularly, and we've invited Pmac to or Uplift to these meetings. And I think we're still kind of figuring out how all this comes together, because it's a huge body of work. And honestly, it's obviously one that no one has ever nailed down. This is, I mean, trying to educate about employee benefits, and to encourage, needed and appropriate utilization. That's a tough job.
It is, Brian. And can I add that we have stellar rates? We're still, out of a 5-point star, our workshop on a consistent basis is anywhere from, quote me, please correct me, Brad and Dr. Johnson, if I'm wrong, but 4.5, 4.3 to 4.5
That's
range.
correct.
So new state workers, existing state workers, seasonal workers come in, and they said that our explanations is on point, and we try to stay high because, again, we service 72 agencies, departments, and commissions, and so we can't, pin down every single benefit according to their bargaining agreement. And so we try to stay high and try to explain benefits in a way that is applicable to them and takes them to the right carrier, provider, and servicer.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee members for Uplift Oregon?
I do have a question. So this is Gayla. So when I was just thinking about this, the way that you guys were communicating is maybe you can give us some ideas about how, I mean, yeah, we can get some information from Canopy, but maybe we can get some ideas from you guys about, how we can better, point out and get our message out. So yeah, I appreciate it. It's great knowing a little bit more about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and not
Excellent.
only if you have good ideas, not only feel free to speak up, but I think the corollary to that is, as we continue to meet directly with, you guys and Pebb staff, again, things that we can do. I know sometimes as we get busy, we're not always as responsive in real time as we could be, but things that we can do to help support your work that maybe we're not already doing, just let us know. But definitely feel free, as we have these committee discussions, if you have ideas that you think would be good for the committee to consider, please do speak up. Because again, I think one thing we want to accomplish is, even though this is a Pmac meeting, I think we want all stakeholders and partners who attend to feel like they can contribute, because none of us have all the answers,
Well, and that's a really good point, because we kind of need we need each other. We really do.
Yes.
And because I was just thinking about, in terms of the things that my group does, that maybe there are some times where we could actually include Uplift Oregon, and in some kind of creative ways to just, I don't know, because everybody has such different styles of communication and learning styles that you just really have to be able to mix it up. But so this is really great. Thank you.
Yeah, and to the extent that you have a captive, engaged audience too of newer employees, that does present a great opportunity where, as soon as their benefits are eligible, it's like, hey, do you need help with a mortgage? Do you need this or that? Like, make an appointment with your primary care doc if you don't have one already, all those sorts of things. And I do think part of what we're going to all do together with Teresa and Emily is
Sir
figure out
Lance.
how we're going to coordinate all this work together. And again, we don't have all the specific answers for that, but part of what the Wellbeing Framework development will hopefully help us do is how to tie all this work together, but in a way that's coordinated, where we can all participate. Even if Pmac leads in one area, we'll be open for council comments, for Uplift's participation, and vice versa. So I think a lot of this stuff will continue coming together over the next year. In general, and Sharna?
Yes, thank you, Brian. I was just going to say, particularly, not just in addition to what Dr. Danisha shared, but what Gayla has shared, one of the ways in which we stay informed is by being able to come to these types of opportunities. And I'll give you, for instance, we're on the second iteration of our Uplift Your Benefit. So we're at Uplift Your Benefit 2.0. And as a result of being able to make these types of connections, it better informs us so that we can better inform the state workers. And one of the things that I would say would be most recent is when Canopy had shared so much of their overview. We were able to take some of those things that they were pointing out, particularly in the research that they were providing, and we were able to immediately transfer some of those really high important points that they wanted to make to us so that state workers were had that same type of availability of information. We're consistently working toward that level of equity to ensure that we're presenting it in a way that they can understand so that they can make the best decision for themselves and for their families. And we also meet thanks to Brian, he offered us some wonderful connections with some of the health benefit plans, for instance, with Kaiser, of course, Providence and Moda. And so we were able to meet with them and to establish more of a clarity in terms of whether or not there were any changes that they would like for us to highlight so that, again, those state workers are able to make better decisions based on the information that they're getting in that way. So we spend a lot of time working toward ensuring that wellness isn't othered, and what I mean by that is that it's not presented in a way, even the state workers, that makes it seem like it's a luxury, because sometimes wellness is presented in ways that don't necessarily create equity for people who think that getting a massage is a luxury when it may be a part of their benefit package, just as an example. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, General.
Thank you.
Sharna?
Hi. Let's see. Okay, I'm unmuted. I just wanted to show an appreciation for everything that Uplift is doing. It sounds like you guys are getting amazing feedback, and this just dovetails really nicely. I think maybe Dr. Johnson and I had a similar idea, but the idea of normalizing the access to the EAP, and that everybody needs to call, and that it's not a big deal, and that we're, the more we get that message out, the better off we are. And we've got this opportunity with all the new employees as cohorts coming through that they can adopt that and share that message. So I just wanted to say, the comments that Gayla made and Danisha, just thank you so much for doing this. And I really do look forward to collaborating with you in helping to create that equity.
Yes, and I echo that. Thank you very much. These sorts of efforts are things that have to be a group effort. And even then, I'm sure it's going to feel like we're never doing enough. I mean, when I hear these stories from members, there's times where I have to step back because I start feeling like a failure. Like, what can we do? And we got to keep moving forward together, leaning on each other's good ideas, and just coordinating. And again, I think we've come a long way in the past year, trying to tie some of this work together. But I think there's a way to go. And I think for Teresa and I, trying to coordinate the different committees, it's a new body of work for us. And behind these meetings, there's, all these decision-making processes that her and I have to go through internally to OEP and Pebb and sometimes OHA. Honestly, it would be impossible for her and I to do our work without all of your expertise, because we really do rely on all the different perspectives and everything. So I just want to say I'm really excited about this work. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy you guys. I enjoy the discussions. And honestly, I'm looking forward, I think the next 3 or 4 months, really, we do have some real life actionable recommendations that could impact members. And I'm, not to put pressure on us, but I'm excited to get them through and see if we can have an impact. So with that said, thanks again. Any other final thoughts, Michael?
Hey, Brian. Yeah. So for Dr. Johnson, Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Neldner, I just was going to say, it's a little intimidating, first of all, with all these people with doctorates, that as we move forward with this new wellness program, which is really exciting, just having an eye to social determinants of health. And I know Stephen mentioned that with the Hero Scorecard, we're starting to take a look at the different domains. And we just know that underserved communities are disproportionately impacted by social determinants of health. And I think, Dr. Johnson, like you said, getting a massage might be important for some people. Other people might say, I don't have time for a massage. Like, I'm working 2 jobs. And, I knew you were just giving that an example. And I know on the current benefit vendors, we're looking at how are they identifying and addressing, right? Not just identifying, but then interventions to look at social determinants of health, and then of course also behavioral health or mental health as well. And so again, not just identifying, but interventions to help connect members to transportation, housing, food, whatever. And I'll just say, and I say this to my employer clients, like, employers are behind like where Medicaid and Medicare are. Those plans have been doing this work, health equity work, for some time, and employer-sponsored plans are just beginning to look at this. But a recent study showed that 27% of commercially insured members live in zip codes with the average 200% of poverty level or below. So they're going to have, they're at risk, not necessarily, they may not have specific need, but they're at risk when they live in that kind of environment. So I just think kind of infusing the social determinants of health throughout not only like the medical carrier, disability, and EAP, but also the wellness program, I think is really important. And Stephen knows that, and I'm sure Dr. Johnson and Dr. Reynolds know that as well. And just keeping in that will be a major paradigm shift, I think, for wellness program, and has been a complaint of some wellness programs by different underserved communities, not acknowledging that and addressing it. So anyway, just had to say my 2 cents worth there, and we're going to incorporate that in the Hero Scorecard for sure. But anyway, just want to mention that. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, so with that, I think we can call it a day. Thank you for everyone's time. We'll be in touch, and for those of you, for the Pmac members who will attend the council meeting June, again, if you're interested in those recommendations, feel free to join June's council meeting. And for the council members, we'll be back here at the June Pebb board or Pebb meeting or Pmac meeting with some of the more communication related recommendations. So feel free to join in that meeting. And until then, you guys take care of yourselves, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thanks,
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, good meeting. That was a good meeting, guys.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.